They both know that this trip needs to be a success after recent missteps and negative headlines. No time to waste then, Harry.
We watch, almost in disbelief, as the Golden Prince of the Monarchy, once celebrated for charm, charisma, and a polished public image, finds himself utterly unmoored, his carefully curated global brand crashing against the unyielding walls of reality. Harry and Meghan, hand in hand, both acutely aware that this trip to South Africa had to succeed, had little time to waste. Headlines and whispers had already cast shadows over them, and every step now mattered. There would be no room for error, no margin for misstep. The stakes were high, higher than perhaps even they understood. For a couple so used to admiration, deference, and privilege, the coming humiliation was a blade hidden just out of sight, ready to strike with surgical precision. Prince Harry, who once embodied royalty's golden standard, now faced something no royal PR team could spin, no polished speech could soften. A public slap from the South African government itself. His request to visit the country, framed in his mind as a matter of goodwill, a humanitarian mission, was denied. Bluntly, unequivocally, and publicly, the government declared, "You are not welcome here." Imagine it, a prince, a man born to command attention, a man accustomed to doors opening without effort, being told by an entire sovereign nation that his presence was not requested, not desired, and would not be permitted. For someone whose life has been staged in ceremonial grandeur and royal pomp, this rejection was catastrophic. Not a mere oversight, not a minor diplomatic inconvenience. This was official, governmental, irrefutable, and unflinchingly public. And as the news broke, the world watched, not with admiration, but with a slow, deliberate scrutiny, as Harry's crimson-faced embarrassment unfolded in real time. This wasn't just a setback. It was a vivid illustration of a man whose celebrity brand, long inflated by privilege, could no longer override institutional authority or national sovereignty. Even the most loyal observers had to acknowledge the irony. Nyanga Township, the place Harry and Meghan had chosen for their visit, was no idyllic pastoral landscape. It was a community grappling with danger, where the murder rate had become a grim statistic of daily life. The couple had intended to show solidarity, to support a refuge for women and children, and yet, amidst the smiles and carefully staged hugs, the reality of their rejection hung over the narrative like a storm cloud. Insiders, sources close to the South African government, confirmed that this was no minor miscommunication. Harry's request had been considered at the highest levels and denied, citing a complex mix of protocol concerns, security demands, and the sensitive nature of his past public statements. This was a calculated move, a measured rebuke designed to assert sovereignty while highlighting the prince's overreach. Royal family members, as tradition dictates, rarely experience such public refusals. The rare instances are whispered quietly, handled delicately behind closed doors. This, however, was nothing of the sort. The denial went public, with South African media seizing the narrative and framing it in the language Harry has long been accused of: entitlement, expectation, and self-importance. They painted a prince accustomed to bows, curtsies, and ceremonial respect, now confronted with a reality where the world was not obliged to accommodate his every whim. For Harry, the timing could not have been worse. Mounting controversies had already begun eroding his image. Failed ventures, high-profile media criticisms, and the perception that privilege was being leveraged over substance had slowly chipped away at his public goodwill. The denial, now glaringly public, symbolized the cumulative effect of these missteps. It was a reminder that global admiration is earned, not inherited, and certainly not demanded. And then there was Meghan, ever present, a figure of determination and poise amidst the unfolding storm. She had always marked her presence with a strong, unapologetic voice, demanding to be heard, insisting that the platform she commanded was not just for show, but a vehicle for genuine advocacy. Her stance was undeniable, especially here, in a country grappling with violence against women, where her advocacy could resonate profoundly. And yet, even as she spoke with passion and conviction, her husband's public image hovered in the background, a shadow looming over every gesture, every word, every carefully orchestrated smile. Harry's recent history of high-profile commentary had rendered his presence politically delicate. Interviews, activist statements, and media appearances painted a portrait of a man deeply engaged in global issues, yet increasingly divorced from the mechanics of real-world diplomacy. South Africa's refusal, therefore, was not mere pettiness. It was a conscious move to avoid potential diplomatic complications, to maintain control over narrative and protocol, and to assert that celebrity, even royal celebrity, does not grant automatic access. The public humiliation was compounded by previous institutional rebuffs. GSK had denied sponsorship for private jet travel. Netflix and Spotify scaled back Sussex projects. High-profile figures, from comedians to commentators, openly mocked him. Every denial, every critique, every small public rebuff piled upon the last, slowly eroding the carefully constructed image of the global humanitarian prince. What emerged was a pattern. A man who expected privilege, access, and influence as a right, confronted repeatedly with the truth that the world operates on standards beyond his celebrity brand. Security concerns, a point of contention for years, played a pivotal role. Harry had long demanded extensive, often extraordinary measures for public appearances. Reports suggest that South African officials found these requests excessive, disproportionate, and incompatible with their own protocols. In denying his visit, they sent a clear message. The rules apply to all, even those accustomed to exemption. Every gesture, every carefully rehearsed entrance, every demand for attention, clashed with the reality that nations operate under logic, law, and diplomacy, not entitlement. Even his family-centered image could not mitigate the blow, though Archie accompanied them. There were no plans for family appearances. Governments, it seems, are signaling an unambiguous lesson. Performative presence alone carries no weight. Titles, privileges, celebrity branding, none guarantee influence or access. The South African rejection exposed a rift between the persona of Prince Harry and the tangible respect afforded by global institutions. And the media amplified this rupture mercilessly, painting a picture of a prince increasingly out of touch, increasingly irrelevant, and increasingly dependent on the fragile scaffolding of celebrity approval. The story, however, is more than a personal rebuff. It is a cautionary tale about expectation versus reality, image versus substance, privilege versus performance. Harry's global image, once powered by royal heritage, charity work, and public admiration, now faces the unflinching scrutiny of the real world. Every demand for deference, every expectation of automatic respect is tested against the impartial scales of diplomacy, protocol, and public perception. And in this instance, the scales tipped decidedly against him. Even seemingly small incidents illustrate the broader pattern. Casual encounters, anecdotes of misjudged gestures, public statements, and media appearances all coalesce into a portrait of a man increasingly disconnected from the mechanisms of influence and respect. When Harry assumes that the world will automatically accommodate his presence, he is met instead with an unspoken and now very public truth. Admiration must be earned, cooperation must be negotiated, and respect must be mutual. And yet, in the midst of the humiliation, there remains a complex interplay of human emotion. Harry loves the limelight. He thrives on attention. The denial does not simply sting, it fascinates him, tests him, even fuels him. But the world, ever vigilant, watches the unfolding narrative with a mixture of curiosity and incredulity. They watch the once golden prince grapple with the humbling experience of being refused, a reminder that celebrity, wealth, and royal title do not guarantee compliance from nations, institutions, or people. Meghan's presence adds an additional layer of nuance. Her voice, articulate, passionate, and firm, contrasts with the public perception of Harry's entitlements. She embodies advocacy and activism, a stark reminder that influence is multidimensional and cannot rest on title alone. Yet even her gravitas cannot fully shield Harry from the consequences of misalignment between expectation and reality. In South Africa, the denial is symbolic not only of individual rebuff, but of the limits of the royal brand in a world increasingly skeptical of performative gestures and entitlement-driven narratives. The international lens cannot be ignored. Media coverage, social commentary, and institutional behavior collectively reinforce the lesson. Privilege alone does not dictate outcomes. Every rejection, every criticism, every withheld invitation chips away at influence, laying bare the limits of celebrity diplomacy. Harry's narrative, once shielded by the inherent authority of monarchy, now faces exposure, revealing fragility, susceptibility to public opinion, and vulnerability to institutional discretion. Every aspect of this story, from the township visit to the media coverage, to the security disputes, to Meghan's impassioned advocacy, weaves a tale of high stakes, drama, and profound personal reckoning. Harry is learning that the world does not revolve around him. Doors do not automatically open. Admiration cannot be assumed. And yet, the fascination for the public grows. There is a kind of voyeuristic thrill in watching a prince confront the limits of privilege, witnessing the unraveling of assumptions long taken for granted. The narrative continues to unfold in ways both subtle and spectacular. Private jet, controversies, cancelled streaming projects, public ridicule, and the constant scrutiny of international audiences all contribute to a crescendo of tension and suspense. And at the center stands Harry, red-faced, confronted by a reality that no title can alter, no charm can deflect, and no celebrity can override. In essence, this is more than a story about a royal visit denied. It is a study in hubris, expectation, and consequence. It is a window into the fragile architecture of reputation and influence, showing that even a prince must negotiate the real world, face rebuke, and endure humiliation when assumptions collide with reality. And as the story spreads, carried by media channels, gossip columns, and social discourse, it amplifies a universal truth. Influence, respect, and admiration are earned, negotiated, and maintained, never demanded, never assumed. The saga of Harry and Meghan in South Africa thus becomes a dramatic spectacle of entitlement, pride, and public consequence. The world watches, enthralled, as a prince accustomed to privilege confronts boundaries, encounters limits, and discovers that the doors of the world do not always open at the sound of a title. Each rebuff, each institutional denial, each public criticism becomes a new chapter in a narrative defined not by ceremony or heritage, but by reality, consequence, and the inexorable march of accountability. As the media narrative builds, as headlines emphasize denial, entitlement, and red-faced embarrassment, the tension heightens. The public, already primed by years of coverage of missteps, controversies, and public statements, sees this not just as a royal faux pas, but as a lesson in humility, a spectacle of vulnerability, and a reminder that titles, wealth, and fame offer no immunity from rebuke. Meghan, steadfast and articulate, becomes both a counterpoint and a witness to the unfolding drama. Her advocacy, her voice, and her presence illuminate the story's stakes, highlighting social issues, humanitarian concerns, and the contrast between performative gestures and substantive action. Yet even as she commands attention and respect, the shadow of Harry's public missteps looms large, providing a continuous thread of tension, suspense, and dramatic irony. And so the story unfolds, relentless, escalating, with every media mention, social commentary, and institutional decision adding fuel to the fire. Harry's golden image, once untouchable, now faces scrutiny, challenge, and undeniable public rebuke. The South African government's denial, stark and deliberate, reverberates beyond its borders, signaling to the world that titles, legacy, and privilege are no longer guarantees of access, influence, or automatic admiration. The narrative is compelling because it touches on universal themes: expectation versus reality, perception versus truth, privilege versus accountability. It resonates not only because it involves royalty, but because it mirrors the broader human experience. The collision between assumptions, desire, and the unyielding structure of reality. And as Harry navigates the fallout, red-faced, scrutinized, and publicly humiliated, we cannot look away. The drama is visceral, the suspense palpable, and the stakes both intimate and global. Even anecdotal glimpses, casual remarks, and seemingly minor events feed the narrative. From small public encounters to high-profile interviews, the pattern emerges. A man whose entitlement clashes repeatedly with expectation, a celebrity accustomed to control discovering its limits, and a global audience captivated by the unfolding spectacle. Every nuance, every gesture, every reaction contributes to the growing tension, making each moment rich with suspense, drama, and narrative weight. And through it all, we are reminded that influence is fragile, reputation precarious, and privilege conditional. Harry's journey, marked by repeated rebuffs, media scrutiny, and public humiliation, is not just a story about a royal visit denied. It is a cautionary tale, a spectacle of dramatic irony, and a deeply human story about the limits of expectation, the inevitability of consequence, and the stark reality that the world does not revolve around any one individual, however titled or famous they may be. The South African refusal, while ostensibly a diplomatic decision, becomes emblematic of a larger narrative. A global stage where celebrity, privilege, and expectation collide with the immutable reality of institutional authority, public scrutiny, and consequence. And as Harry stands, red-faced, navigating this intricate web of rebuke, critique, and scrutiny, we are compelled to watch, to analyze, and to marvel at the unraveling of an image long considered golden, now tempered by the unrelenting forces of reality. We begin, as always, with the curious contrast between expectation and reality, a theme that has haunted Prince Harry's public life for years, but never more sharply than in this latest, deeply humiliating turn of events. Here is a man who once walked the world with a crown behind his name, whose presence alone elicited bowing, curtsies, and admiration, now confronted with the stark truth. Titles do not equal influence. Privilege does not guarantee access, and entitlement is no shield against rebuke. Harry and Meghan, both acutely aware of the precarious position they occupy in the public eye, had arrived in South Africa with hope, strategy, and a desire to project humanitarian goodwill. The world, however, had a different plan. The South African government, a sovereign authority with no obligation to indulge celebrity, refused Harry's visit request outright. This was not a minor oversight, not a bureaucratic delay, not a private note exchanged behind closed doors. It was public, it was deliberate, and it was humiliating in the most visceral sense imaginable. Imagine the scene. Harry, red-faced, accustomed to being greeted with deference, to having doors open automatically, to the world bending in subtle and unspoken ways to his status, confronted by the blunt reality of institutional authority. The government's message was simple and unambiguous. You are not welcome here. And yet, this is a man who has spent years building a brand carefully straddling humanitarian credibility, royal prestige, and celebrity influence. Every step had been calculated, every gesture staged, every public appearance choreographed to convey charm, compassion, and global importance. yet all of it at once collided with the cold logic of political authority. The denial served as a crystal-clear confirmation that the world no longer owes him acquiescence simply because he is royal. The gates that once swung wide with ceremonial grace remained firmly closed, leaving Harry exposed, embarrassed, and undeniably human. The South African decision did not occur in isolation. It is part of a larger pattern, a sequence of increasingly public rebuffs that together form a narrative Harry can no longer ignore. GSK denied sponsorship for private jet travel. Netflix and Spotify scaled back Sussex projects. Figures in media, from comedians to political commentators, openly mocked him. The cumulative effect is staggering. A man, long accustomed to influence, by virtue of name and title now discovers that influence, respect, and admiration are not automatic commodities. They must be earned, negotiated, and maintained. And when missteps accumulate, as they have for Harry, no amount of royal heritage can shield him from the consequences. We cannot overlook the symbolism of Nyanga Township, the intended destination of the visit, which underscores both the nobility of intention and the gravity of rebuke. The township, a community grappling with high levels of crime and the stark realities of violence against women and children, was the backdrop for what should have been a humanitarian endeavor. Meghan, with characteristic poise and determination, sought to draw attention to systemic problems, to give voice to the marginalized, to perform advocacy that mattered. And yet, in the shadow of institutional rejection, the intended goodwill became entangled with public spectacle. A mission that could have elevated their image was instead overshadowed by the glaring, public reminder of limits. Limits even royalty cannot bypass. The media's role in amplifying this drama cannot be overstated. From the BBC to CNN, from local South African publications to international outlets, every narrative emphasized the unusual, the extraordinary nature of a sitting government publicly refusing entry to a member of the British royal family. Headlines were unapologetic in framing the story as a royal embarrassment, a humbling spectacle on the world stage. Analysts emphasized that such public rebuffs are historic, rare, and deeply consequential. For Harry, the lesson was clear. Global admiration is fragile, reputation is volatile, and titles are meaningless without tangible achievements or earned respect. The social media landscape responded with predictable intensity. Memes, commentary, and debates spread like wildfire, dissecting Harry's behavior, questioning his entitlement, and comparing him to other royals who maintained influence. Through measured service and diligent diplomacy, the narrative that emerged painted him as increasingly out of touch, a figure whose brand relied heavily on inherited prestige rather than sustained, demonstrable contribution. For those who follow royal affairs, the spectacle was both irresistible and instructive, a rare glimpse of vulnerability that contrasted starkly with the polished images Harry and Meghan often presented. Even seemingly minor details of his life became fodder for scrutiny and suspense. Casual anecdotes, personal choices, and everyday encounters now carry weight because they feed into the larger narrative of a man increasingly at odds with the world's expectations. Harry's insistence on high-level security measures, for instance, long criticized as excessive, is now framed within a pattern of overreach. Requests for private jets, preferential treatment, and accommodations beyond reason are no longer seen as minor eccentricities, but as elements in a recurring story of entitlement. And when these patterns collide with sovereign authority, the results are inevitably public and consequential. Meghan's role in this unfolding drama is complex and critical. She embodies advocacy, passion, and articulate insistence on being heard, particularly on issues of gender, race, and social justice. Her presence at every stage magnifies both the stakes and the scrutiny. While her intentions may be laudable, They exist within a framework of public perception heavily influenced by Harry's reputation and behavior. In a world watching closely, where every word and gesture is dissected, the interplay between Meghan's activism and Harry's entitlement creates a tension that heightens drama, suspense, and narrative intrigue. The South African refusal, therefore, is both a personal and symbolic rebuke, a reminder that influence requires not only platform but alignment, discretion, and humility. The historical context intensifies the humiliation. Rarely do governments issue public denials to royals, making this a moment of profound symbolic significance. The rejection reverberates across international boundaries, signaling to other institutions, media outlets, and governments that the Sussex brand can no longer demand automatic compliance or respect. Timing amplifies the impact. Amid previous missteps, cancelled deals, and media controversies, this rebuff is a stark punctuation mark, emphasizing the fragility of influence that rests primarily on celebrity rather than achievement. Even the personal human dimensions of Harry's life intertwine with the drama, adding layers of suspense and intrigue. Stories of early romance, clandestine meetings, and private gatherings now carry subtext, interpreted in light of public humiliation. Every anecdote, whether about a Halloween party in Toronto or a quiet moment with friends, is reframed through the lens of contemporary scrutiny, illustrating how personal narratives can be weaponized, interpreted, and amplified. In a culture obsessed with royalty, celebrity, and spectacle, the cumulative pattern is clear. Harry's brand, once seemingly invincible, is increasingly vulnerable. Every rebuff chips away at perception, every institutional refusal undermines credibility, and every public critique magnifies the gap between aspiration and reality. Privilege, heritage, and celebrity, once sufficient to secure attention and access, are now insufficient. Influence is no longer guaranteed by name or title alone. It must be continually negotiated and earned. A lesson Harry is learning with every public misstep. The South African snub also resonates commercially. Netflix and Spotify projects, once seen as emblematic of the Sussex's global relevance, are now viewed with greater skepticism. Investors, sponsors, and audiences alike are questioning the reach, influence, and sustainability of the brand. Corporate partners weigh the reputational risk, considering whether association with a figure increasingly embroiled in controversy, denial, and ridicule is desirable. Each denial, each snub, and each setback contributes to a narrative of declining influence, reinforcing the perception that titles, celebrity, and past prestige are insufficient shields against scrutiny and consequence. The visual and symbolic elements of the story deepen its resonance. Nyanga Township, as a site of humanitarian focus, becomes both a backdrop and a metaphor. Even in places intended to symbolize compassion, advocacy, and goodwill, the structural realities of authority, protocol, and institutional judgment prevail. The intended gestures of support and solidarity are reframed through the lens of rejection, highlighting the limitations of personal branding when confronted by collective governance. This story is not merely a personal rebuff. It is an allegory for a modern world in which celebrity cannot replace substance. It demonstrates that the machinery of governance, diplomacy, and public accountability operates independently of inherited status, fame, or entitlement. Even those born into privilege, even those accustomed to influence, must navigate the rigorous expectations of institutions and society at large. As the saga unfolds, public interest intensifies. Social media amplifies. Scrutiny, memes circulate endlessly, and commentary ranges from mockery to analysis. Every move Harry and Meghan make is examined, every gesture interpreted, and every statement contextualized within the larger narrative of entitlement, privilege, and public perception. The drama is relentless, the suspense continuous, and the stakes both personal and symbolic. In essence, this is more than a story of a royal visit denied. It is a narrative of expectation confronted by reality, of brand versus substance, and of privilege tested against institutional authority. Harry, once seemingly untouchable, now faces a sequence of challenges that underscore a fundamental truth. Respect, influence, and admiration are earned, not inherited. Entitlement offers no immunity, and celebrity cannot substitute for credibility. The lessons extend beyond the personal. They resonate with audiences worldwide, sparking conversations about accountability, humility, and the limits of inherited privilege. They remind us that the world does not bend to expectation, that even those with the highest titles are subject to consequence, and that public perception, media scrutiny, and institutional authority form a triad of accountability impossible to evade. Meghan's advocacy, while noble and passionate, cannot fully shield Harry from these realities. Her presence amplifies both opportunity and scrutiny, highlighting the interplay between performance, intention, and perception. Every gesture, every speech, and every public appearance now carries dual significance. It is both personal and emblematic, reflecting not only individual ambition, but the dynamics of reputation, branding, and influence on the global stage. The South African refusal becomes a lens through which we examine broader patterns. Cancelled deals, media ridicule, institutional rebuffs, and public skepticism converge to form a portrait of a brand under siege. It is a narrative rich with suspense, drama, and continuous hooks, compelling audiences to follow, analyze, and debate every development. The spectacle is irresistible because it blends the personal with the symbolic, the intimate with the global, creating a story that resonates beyond celebrity intrigue into universal truths about power, expectation, and consequence. Every aspect of Harry's response, from public gestures to media commentary, now becomes part of the unfolding drama. His brand, once protected by the aura of royalty, now faces relentless scrutiny. Each rebuff, each snub, each public critique adds tension, suspense, and narrative momentum. The world watches, riveted, as expectation meets reality. Privilege collides with consequence, and celebrity confronts the hard, unyielding wall of institutional authority. In this relentless sequence, Harry is learning lessons both public and profound. Titles do not confer automatic respect. Entitlement does not guarantee influence, and celebrity cannot substitute for achievement. Every misstep, every denied request, every public rebuke chips away at the scaffolding of image, leaving only the stark reality of action, credibility, and earned respect. And so the narrative continues, unfolding in real time, rich with hooks, suspense, and drama. Social media buzzes, international headlines flare, and public discussion intensifies, transforming what might have been a private diplomatic nuance into a global spectacle. Harry's story becomes not merely about personal setback, but a cautionary tale about the fragility of influence, the imperatives of humility, and the limits of privilege. Through every twist, every public embarrassment, and every denied opportunity, audiences remain captivated. The drama is continuous, the suspense ever-present, and the lessons undeniable. Titles, celebrity, and inherited privilege cannot replace action, credibility, and alignment with institutional realities. Harry's experience in South Africa crystallizes these truths in vivid, public, and unforgettable terms, creating a story as dramatic, compelling, and suspenseful as any royal saga in modern history. This is Crown and Controversy, unraveling the royals one scandal at a time. Don't forget to subscribe.